they were treating all of that sowed a seed. In fact, I made a visit to an Orthodox church for the first time. I went down on a feast day, a midweek feast day, to the Greek church in town, and it was all in Greek, which was kind of interesting, but it just wasn't, whatever it was, it just didn't click at the time. And I just let it be and went back to what I was doing. But the seed had been sown. And when I went to seminary, one of my professors had done his doctorate under Florovsky at Harvard, which is cool. I mean, it just is. And he found out that I had this Orthodox interest. And so he was professor of dogmatics. So he was teaching, and what he taught in dogmatics would have been fine in any Orthodox seminary for that matter. And classical Anglicanism held to those classical doctrines. And so we were, he later got in trouble because he wasn't classical enough to support the ordination of women, and they kind of fired him for that. But he was just feeding me wonderful stuff. And I met Callistos Ware before he was a bishop. He came and lectured at our seminary. This professor took me to a theological meeting, and I met Schmemann through him. I mean, I was like, again, sort of little Forrest Gump moments, and not knowing this was going to be my future. Right. But I mean,
You've
really,
got the all-star Orthodox cast appearing.
Yeah. All of whom impressed me well. I remember talking with this Orthodox priest at this meeting where Schmemann was lecturing, and we were sitting outside smoking cigarettes together. And this priest asked me about my interest in Orthodoxy, and I started. He said, "Well, why haven't you become Orthodox?" And I said to him, "Well, I'm thinking about it." And he said, "Well, you haven't thought long enough." I mean, he was not very ecumenical, and which it was all good. But I think what was true for me there in my 20s, and both beginning in college and then in seminary, was that Orthodoxy became like a touchstone for me. Like, I knew this was true. I wasn't certain that it was something you could actually do, little Anglo boy from South Carolina like me. But the seed was sown, and so it became a touchstone. So if I doubted something or wondered about it in my Anglican ministry years and stuff, I mean, a question for me was, well, what do the Orthodox think about that? And
that's so interesting. Wow.
Yeah. And so,
yeah. But, I can see that as an American, like you said, an Anglo boy from South Carolina, right? Like, you don't look like an Orthodox person. You don't have a name like those guys. So it sort of feels like, well, I can be a big fan of that, and I can model myself after that without necessarily joining it, which also is kind of an American Protestant thing too, of
sure,
picking up the good parts and not feeling like you have to completely commit. You can just...
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bieletich-Davis will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
This is Father Stephen Freeman. I'm happy to announce Ancient Faith's publication of my latest book, Face to Face, Knowing God Beyond Our Shame. Some modern therapists have described shame as the master emotion, one that colors and shapes our world in ways that we hardly imagine. The Christian tradition is no stranger to this and has a rich understanding of the ways this part of our inner life shapes our experience of the world. This book offers something of a roadmap to that inner life. What is shame? Is it always bad? Does it have any useful purpose for us? Join me in an exploration of knowing God beyond our shame, finding the true God whom the Scriptures tell us did not turn his face from the spitting and the shame. Face to Face is now available at store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bieletich-Davis. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AFB. Here again is Elisa.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We're here tonight with Father Stephen Freeman. And of course, he's the author of the new book, Face to Face, Knowing God Beyond Our Shame. And we've been talking about, Father, your Forrest Gump life, where you've found yourself just sort of, stumbling across all of these very important moments and important people. And so let's see, where last we left it, you were done with the commune, you've moved on to the Episcopal Seminary. And meanwhile, were you playing in a band during the seminary years? That's when you were?
No.
That was college.
Right. Yeah. I kind of gave it up. I just thought that's not going to work. And here's the change. Before I went to seminary, I'm playing in a band in a bar while I'm in seminary. My senior year, priest at the church where I was helping out as a seminarian said, "What do you want to do this year?" And I told him, I said, "I want to learn to play golf." He said, "Why?" I said, "I'm going to the South. And it's the Episcopal Church. I have to play either golf or tennis." So
that's right. It's a country club church.
And so it was. And I played golf faithfully for all those years I was an Episcopal priest. And I hardly ever played since I became Orthodox. I don't know. So it's funny how those things are. I've sometimes joked, not always kindly, and said about my years as an Episcopal priest that I spent 20 years trying to pass for white. It's a very upper class church many times, and especially in the Southeast. And I just was not to the manner born. I do love theology. And after 8 years of parish ministry in a parish in the Greenville area in South Carolina, I left parish work and wanted to go work on a doctorate in theology, which actually my first Episcopal bishop had made me promise I would stay open to doing, because he thought I had an academic in me somewhere. So I went to Duke and studied under Jeffrey Wainwright and Stanley Hauerwas. Oh, wow. And they were both really wonderful theologians. And Jeffrey Wainwright, interestingly, he was given an honorary doctorate at St. Vladimir's. He did lots and lots of Orthodox stuff in the ecumenical world. He was a British Methodist, but it was studying under him, and he was letting me, I was just reading Orthodox stuff there and writing papers and learning and gathering all the stuff you do in doctoral programs. And he got me on the topic, and I wound up doing my thesis on the theology of icons. And through a series of things, I wound up deciding I really wanted to be in parish ministry, and I wound up turning out my study into an MA, turned my dissertation into a thesis, and finished and took a call to a parish here in Oak Ridge, where I am now. And served there for the next 9 years. But it was funny, when I had, the morning after I had defended my thesis at Duke, I woke up the next morning. This was huge. And I'd had some interchanges in the defense of my thesis the day before. But I woke up that next morning and I knelt by my bed and prayed, "Oh God, make me Orthodox." And I meant two things about that. But it was a huge thing to say that. But I meant, I want to be Orthodox. And I also meant, but you'll have to make me. Part of me is just a terrible coward. And it was like, especially the idea of giving up what was a career, which I was beginning to do well in, and did sort of have nice position, place in the community and all that. But it was just clear to me that this was the truth, and that it's what I believed, and just to the very core of my being. The day before, Hauerwas had cornered me in the middle of my defense and said to me, here I am writing on icons. He said, "Do you believe the veneration of icons to be necessary to salvation?" Episcopal priests, when they're ordained, have to take an oath. At least they did back then. Who knows what they do now? But that they believe the scriptures of the Old and New Testaments to contain all things necessary to salvation. So he asked me that question, and he and I both knew it was a loaded question. He was basically asking me my ordination vows.
Yeah.
But here's something else. Do you believe the veneration of icons is necessary for salvation? And I hesitated and had to it was an existential question.
Yeah.
And I said to him finally, I said, well, I know what my oath of ordination says, but I believe the veneration of icons is necessary to the fullness of salvation. At that time, I was later talking to an Orthodox priest who laughed and said, it was a very Orthodox answer. And I'm thinking, well, I'm glad, but I realized that this was, this had moved. I mean, God bless him. He moved that from being kind of an academic, interchange to see right to my heart. What do you believe? Not what do you think, or did you write, or would your thesis mean this, but what do you believe? And so the next morning I prayed, and it was 7 years later before I became Orthodox. But in the middle of those 7 years, first off, I discovered the OCA in a storefront church in Columbia, South Carolina. I was on vacation, and a friend took me down, and I looked at it, and it was a blue-collar convert parish with a priest from Brooklyn who sounded like Bugs Bunny. His accent sounded like Bugs Bunny to me. Anyway, and I looked at it, and I thought, well, this will preach. This is this is real.
Right?
And
like that, and that's a community you can see yourself in, right? Like, okay,
I could,
it
wasn't, the nice manner that I was being used to, but
yes.
I met that, and that priest later introduced me to Archbishop Dimitri of blessed memory, who became a spiritual father for me. And in 98, really 97, I found a job so I could leave my Episcopal church. And I had 4 children by then. Oldest was 17, the youngest was 6. So that's a full house. I got a job as a hospice chaplain and left the Episcopal church. I literally, this is enough. And and so I was immediately, he had in mind already that we would start the mission in the Knoxville area here in Tennessee. And so I was immediately appointed as the lay pastor for the beginning mission. So I went, it was like out of the frying pan and into the fire, but it was God's fire. And so we started in a living room, then moved to a warehouse, then to a storefront, and then to the building that we're in now. And it's been, the learning curve was vertical, especially liturgical and stuff. And, I will say though, the one thing without any doubt, in these, in fact, tomorrow is my 24th anniversary of my ordination to the priesthood, Orthodox.
Wow.
So,
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, I'm excited. But the one thing I can say from the beginning is I knew I was home. And when it comes to writing and speaking, it's like that really has blossomed. I didn't write anything for 8 years after I became Orthodox. I really felt it'd be sort of cheeky of me to start writing, and so I waited, and it kind of came to me, and I was asked to write, and it started doing that, and things kind of grew out of that. But the truth is that it has always felt completely natural. I mean, what I believe as an Orthodox Christian, which is the Orthodox faith, is what I really, really believe, and had really been, and then, became engaged and all. But I've always been able to be me with her. I never felt like I ever was expected to be anything other than who I really am. I mean, sometimes who I really am has been a jerk, but, she's put up with that too, and helped me get better. Help me repent. But Yeah, it has felt very natural to both of us. I told someone recently, and this started from the early parts of our relationship. Um, I've never made a single spiritual decision in my life since we got together that hasn't been a mutual decision. Um, and I could not imagine thinking or doing anything about God that she didn't agree with. I just can't imagine that. I mean, she's that much of a touchstone to me as well, and she would say the same thing. In fact, I've heard her say something like the same thing. And so, um, I'm
That's beautiful.
yeah, I'm very
I love
blessed
that.
in that. Yeah,
You are. You are. Absolutely.
yeah,
Well, Father, I want to hear a little bit more about Vladika Dimitri because I was in the
yes,
OCA for the last few years of his life. So he was my bishop for a while there. And
yeah,
we were in Plano, so we were near Dallas. So we got to see a lot
right.
of him. And he was lovely. So I want to hear a little bit about your recollections of Archbishop Dimitri.
Metropolitan Callistos Ware in England,
Mhm.
as in like Metropolitan Callistos Ware ducks into a church in a out of the rain or something and winds up in a Russian church and is just transfixed by what he sees and converts in the early 1950s. It just wasn't done. I mean, the first book in English on the Orthodox Church wasn't published until 1962, and Callistos Ware wrote it. Uh, uh, so, Archbishop Dimitri, he became Orthodox in 1940. 1940. He and his sister had become, as teenagers, were convinced that the Orthodox Church was the original church based on reading encyclopedia articles. There
Is
weren't
that
any
where they?
books.
I wondered because they
There
were
were
in
no books.
College Station, Texas, right? And
Uh,
exactly, Metropolitan Callistos had not written anything yet, and so
right.
that's how in the
1940. And
encyclopedia.
so they went to Trinity Church, Greek Orthodox Church in Dallas, which was the only Orthodox church probably in that part of Texas at all. They went, he said, for 6 weeks, no one even spoke to them. What these little Anglo boy and girl want here? Nobody spoke to them. And finally, after 6 weeks, his sister was ready to quit. And he said, no, if this is the true church, we need to stay. And they stayed. And the next week, the usher told him the priest wants to speak to you. And the priest spoke to them, asked him a couple of questions, and said, well, we'll begin doing classes for your baptism. And that's how they became Orthodox. Um,
Wow.
he,
I mean,
he,
it's
yeah,
amazing. They
well,
were
it is.
driving, like at least 3 hours to get to that church. Like they were teenage kids driving.
Effort of becoming the first fully elected metropolitan of the OCA after we got our autocephaly from Moscow. In 1974, we had to elect a metropolitan. If he'd have had a majority of all the votes, 2/3 or whatever of the clergy and the laity, and he was like 3 votes shy of it. And the Holy Synod in the OCA said, no, we're brand new in our autocephaly. We're still not certain how everybody's going to treat us. We can't have a convert metropolitan. And so they made Theodosius the metropolitan. And 4 years later, it was said that they created the Diocese of the South and sent Vladika Dimitri down here. There was like about 4 churches total OCA in the South, and they were like mostly snowbird parishes. Yankees come south for the winter, and they attend these parishes, but they weren't like thriving parishes. And he came down in 78. Father Tom Hopko said to him later that God prevented you from becoming metropolitan in order to send you to the South to become a saint. And of course, over the course of his lifetime, his invitations, they joked in New York. When I first came in, I heard a joke about him that he would start a mission anywhere he could find 2 old ladies and a cat under a tree. And I thought, well, that sounds like our mission in Knoxville. 2 old ladies and a cat,
There were some pretty small missions. I think they're still.
Oh, it was, and any priest out there who's ever started a mission from scratch knows what I'm talking about. It's awful. It's hard. It's oftentimes our personalities of the people that are willing to do that aren't sort of joyful hospitality that just welcomed us. And he was not afraid of me when I came into the church. we'd gotten to know each other. He felt good. He liked me. It was just things are doing fine. And he was just that way. What many of us who do think he's a saint, I've said that I didn't think he could administer his way out of a wet paper bag, that he was not a very good administrator, but he was an apostle.
Yeah.
He had
shepherd.
He had an apostolic anointing. He started churches and they grew. And now, in some ways, the Diocese of the South is the cash cow of the OCA. I mean, he taught us to tithe, you know, and good former Baptist that he was, he taught us to tithe. We gave money. We now, when I came into the diocese, we were mostly storefront churches and part-time priests. Now it is mostly, we send some of the largest numbers to St. Tikhon's and to St. Vladimir's come out of the South. We're a diocese of newly built churches and full-time priests, and are sending lots and lots of vocations. And it continues to grow and maturing. But I think and I remember he told me he had met a priest of what would later become the OCA when he was in the military in World War II. And the priest was describing to him this vision that was very much the vision that would become the OCA, of an American church that is Orthodoxy for Americans, regardless of ethnicity or anything else, but an Orthodoxy that spoke English, that sang English, that, is pretty much what an OCA parish is today when you go in them. And we're not alone in that. That's, you see that in lots of other things too as well. But
thank God.
It's just wonderfully welcoming. By the time I converted in 1998, I used to joke that things were falling apart in the Episcopal Church. And so there were guys jumping ship left and right. Some went to Rome. Some went to breakaway Anglican groups. A number of us wound up in the Orthodox Church. But I sometimes joked with those friends and said, I feel like the last one leaving the ship. There were more after me, but the changes in mainline denominational Protestantism in America regarding the hot button social issues, everything from women priests to sexuality and gender stuff and things like that, was just moving at an incredible clip that started about the mid 1990s and just sped up. And along with it were some other things going on that just were not anything that I could have stayed in, besides the fact that somewhere in my 20s, I had lost my heart to Orthodoxy anyhow. So,
that seems like that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
In some ways, those are the things that God allowed to happen to get you there. But
sure, my story these days is, I meet other guys who have come through many more difficulties than I did, and or others who've labored with more uncertainty than I ever had. I was never uncertain about it. I mean, I always knew this was the truth. I was uncertain about me. Could I do it? Yeah. Would I be faithful? Was I brave enough to do it when it was scary for me? And
with a family to support and all of that. I mean, it's a lot of responsibility, right? But it's hard to be confident in yourself when you're just a kid from South Carolina.
Well, you begin, I've told people that when you're young, most of your life is outside the windshield and you're in the car speeding down the highway, and you can only see a certain distance, ahead in the windshield, and it's scary and it's all coming so fast, and you're trying to think, where am I supposed to turn? And all of that's going on so fast. And the older you get, the more of your life is out the rearview mirror. And out life in the rearview mirror, you can see the providence of God. You can see what he did, and that he was always had his hand on you and was always taking care of you. Right now, I'm trying to bring that to my windshield, because the road's not very long anymore. I mean, I turned 70 years old this year, and that's the Bible speed limit. You know, you get 70 years and 10. So everything beyond 70 is like, you know, these are extra laps you're being given.
Well, to be fair, you've got a shot at up to 120. That's the maximum.
Well, there is
really.
that. There is that. I do not want to be 120. Just don't want to do. I want to get home to Jesus before that.
Amen.
But
Amen.
this, I just, you know, I can look back and I say it's a sort of a Forrest Gump thing, because when you watch that movie, he's at all of these crossroad moments. It happens to be this like bystander where all of this is happening. And I mean, here's an interesting moment. In my senior year of seminary, the retired Archbishop of Canterbury, who at that time, 101st Archbishop, was Lord Ramsay. And he had been Bishop of Durham in the early 1950s, which meant, well, when Queen Elizabeth was crowned queen, he, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Bishop of York, the three of them crowned her. So I got to meet this guy who lived at my seminary for 3 months and was among us and lectured and stuff. He was a great theologian, but very, very fond of Orthodoxy. He actually wrote once that it was the vocation of Orthodoxy, the vocation of Anglicanism to enter the Orthodox Church. And when Metropolitan Callistos, young Timothy Ware, his family sent him to talk to somebody when he said he wanted to become Orthodox. They sent him to Bishop Michael Ramsay in Durham, who was considered England's best theologian at the time, to talk about this. And Metropolitan Callistos told me this story privately when we were together once, that Bishop Ramsay told him, "Of course you should become Orthodox." But, you know, just these people, these giants of a generation that their kind won't come again for a while. They were giants. Archbishop Dimitri was on MacArthur's staff, General MacArthur, World War II.
I had no idea. Really?
Yeah, he was a Japanese translator.
Oh, that's right.
The Army taught him Japanese. I'm a translator.
Oh, wow. Isn't that amazing?
I mean, giants. Giants.
Truly.
Yeah.
Well, Father, thank you so much. It has just
Lisa,
been
thank you.
absolutely such a delight. It's so good to get to know you a little bit better. And of course, I want to remind our audience, your new book is called Face to Face, Knowing God Beyond Our Shame. And Father, it's beautiful. And I think it's going to be very helpful to a lot of us out there. So thank you for writing that.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate it.
And then, of course, thank you to our audience. Thanks, guys, for joining us. And we'll get back together next Sunday night to meet another Everyday Orthodox Christian.